I still remember the first time I noticed it, that faint orange streak bleeding down the side of a bridge, like a vein that had burst beneath the skin of the city. It was early morning, cold mist rising off the river, the kind of gray that makes steel look tired. The bridge was only 40 years old, built with all the confidence of modern engineering. Yet the concrete was already shedding pieces of itself, cracks webbing across the surface like wrinkles spreading too soon. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and wondered, not for the first time, if this was really progress or just a slow failure we'd learned to ignore. Months later, standing under the oculus of the Pantheon in Rome, that question came back to me like an accusation. Above me, the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome floated effortlessly, a perfect curve of stone and light that had been there for nearly 2,000 years. It had survived earthquakes, floods, invasions, even the collapse of the empire that built it. I stared up, feeling the chill of the marble floor through my shoes, and thought, how could something built before the age of steel still stand unbroken, while the creations of our so-called modern age were already crumbling? There is a particular silence inside the Pantheon. The city noise fades at the threshold, and all you can hear is your own breath echoing back from the dome. That silence felt like judgment. For more than 13 centuries after Rome fell, this structure was unmatched in size and strength. Even now, it remains the largest unreinforced concrete dome on Earth. Its endurance isn't an accident, it's evidence. Evidence that the ancients knew something we've forgotten. We live in an age of concrete. It's the foundation beneath our homes, our skyscrapers, our bridges, the literal skeleton of civilization. Yet the more I study it, the more I realize we built this world on sand. Modern concrete, for all its strength, is fragile in time. It performs beautifully under pressure but fails when pulled, twisted, or bent. We thought we solved that weakness in the 19th century, when we began to lace our concrete with steel, reinforcing it, binding two materials into one. It felt like genius. But maybe, I thought, that was the moment we planted the seed of decay. Looking up at that ancient dome, untouched by rust or corrosion, I felt an unease that no textbook had prepared me for. Maybe the Romans didn't just build differently, maybe they thought differently. Maybe they understood that true strength isn't about resistance, but balance. And maybe, somewhere along the way, in our rush for efficiency, we lost that understanding. The Pantheon has endured almost 2 millennia without a single reinforcing bar. Our bridges, our towers, our roads, all armed with steel, are failing in less than a century. That contradiction is what keeps me awake at night. What did the Romans know that we forgot? And how, in all our brilliance, did we manage to make our strongest material so ready to die? For most of my career, I believed reinforced concrete was one of humanity's greatest inventions, a perfect marriage of stone and steel. The textbooks spoke of it with near religious certainty. Concrete, they said, handles compression. Steel handles tension. Together, they create balance, a harmony of opposing forces. But that harmony, I would later learn, hides a tragedy. Concrete, for all its apparent solidity, breathes. It takes in air and moisture through countless microscopic pores. The way a sponge absorbs water, over time, hairline cracks form too small to notice, but large enough to let in oxygen, rain, and salt. The water seeps deeper until it reaches the rebar, the steel skeleton meant to hold the structure together. That's where the quiet disaster begins. Steel does not forgive. The moment it meets water and air, rust is born. Rust is not just corrosion, it's expansion. When steel corrodes, it can grow to 5, even 10 times its original volume. Imagine that pressure building deep inside a wall or bridge deck. For every tiny gram of metal that turns to rust, new material pushes outward with a force of 3 to 4 megapascals. To most people, those numbers mean nothing. But to an engineer, they mean inevitability. I remember kneeling under an overpass during an inspection, the air thick with the smell of damp concrete. My flashlight caught a patch of rust-colored streaks. I tapped it with my hammer. The surface sounded hollow, then a fragment of concrete the size of my palm fell away, revealing a bar of steel swollen and flaking like burned bark. In that moment, I could almost hear the bridge groaning from within. Concrete is magnificent under pressure, but its tensile strength, its ability to resist being pulled apart, is barely a tenth of that. So when rust swells, it acts like a slow explosion trapped inside. The cracks widen, water rushes in faster, and the corrosion accelerates. It's a self-feeding loop of destruction. The steel we added to make the structure strong becomes the very mechanism of its decay. Engineers call this spalling. I call it heartbreak. We designed concrete to last a lifetime, yet we built in a timer that ensures it won't. Every time I see a rust stain creep across a pillar, I think of it as the structure's pulse, a warning that its heart is already failing. We've created a civilization that quietly tears itself apart, one flake of rust at a time. That's when I began to wonder, what if the answer isn't more steel, more coatings, more maintenance? What if the answer lies not in adding but in remembering? When I first began tracing the footsteps of Rome's builders, I didn't expect to find answers underwater. Yet that's exactly where the trail led to the ancient harbor of Caesarea on the coast of Israel, where Roman engineers had once built concrete piers directly into the open sea. Standing there, watching waves crash against stone that had endured 2 millennia of salt and storms, I felt something close to disbelief. Modern concrete in seawater lasts 30, maybe 40 years before it begins to crumble. But here, below the foam, lay walls that had not only survived, they had grown stronger. I joined a group of marine archaeologists one morning as they dove along the submerged ruins. The Mediterranean light fractured through the surface, painting the ancient blocks in silver-blue shimmer. When I ran my hand across the stone, expecting rough decay, I found it smooth and dense, almost alive. Tiny crystals glittered inside the matrix of the concrete, like frost captured in rock. That discovery made no sense according to everything I'd been taught. Seawater should destroy concrete. Salt breaks down the chemical bonds, corrodes the rebar, accelerates failure. Yet Roman concrete seemed to defy chemistry itself. It was as if the sea had become its ally. Back in the lab, researchers began slicing ancient samples, thin enough to view under electron microscopes. What they saw changed our understanding of concrete forever. Inside the Roman mix, seawater hadn't caused corrosion, it had sparked creation. The lime dissolved slowly when exposed to the salt water, then reacted with the volcanic ash mixed into the mortar. Out of that reaction grew crystals of a rare mineral called aluminum tobermorite, interlocking blades of calcium and silica that filled cracks, sealed pores, and strengthened bonds. I remember staring at those magnified crystals on a monitor, feeling the same awe I'd felt under the Pantheon's dome. The structure wasn't static, it was evolving. Over centuries, as waves beat against it, it didn't weaken, it healed. Each droplet of seawater became part of an endless cycle of regeneration. Imagine that for a moment. A material that responds to attack by becoming stronger. A structure that doesn't resist nature, but collaborates with it. The more the ocean punished those Roman walls, the denser and more resilient they became. Their concrete wasn't dead matter, it was, in a way, alive. I couldn't stop thinking about that paradox as I watched the divers surface, sunlight glinting off their wet helmets. We modern engineers treat time as an enemy, corrosion as a failure, and repair as an afterthought. But the Romans, somehow, had built with the humility to expect imperfection. They had turned nature's wear into a mechanism of endurance. And that realization filled me with both wonder and unease. Because if concrete 2,000 years old could teach us how to build forever, then maybe the real question wasn't how they did it, but why we stopped trying. The breakthrough came not from Rome's ruins, but from a laboratory, a room filled with humming machines, the sharp scent of lime, and the quiet murmur of disbelief. I was standing beside Dr. Admir Masick at MIT as he held a fragment of ancient concrete under the microscope, To the naked eye, it was nothing but gray stone, flecked with small white grains. For decades, researchers had dismissed those bright flecks as signs of sloppy mixing, careless work by ancient laborers. But Masick wasn't convinced. If the Romans were so precise in everything else, he said, tapping the sample gently, why would they suddenly be careless here? That question changed everything. When his team zoomed in on those mysterious white specks, the so-called lime clasts, they discovered a story hidden in chemistry. These were not mistakes. They were deliberate. The structure of the clasts revealed they had been formed at extremely high temperatures, far beyond what modern mixing methods would ever produce. That clue pointed to an ancient process we'd forgotten: hot mixing. The Romans, it turned out, hadn't used the safe, pre-slaked lime paste that we do today. They mixed in quicklime raw calcium oxide directly into the volcanic ash and rock, and then added water. The reaction that followed was violent and transformative. Inside the concrete, temperatures soared to over 200 degrees Celsius, releasing steam, heat, and energy that created unique chemical bonds. I remember watching the MIT team replicate the process. The moment they poured water onto the mix, a hiss filled the room, the smell of earth and stone meeting fire. The concrete seemed almost to come alive, crackling, steaming, reshaping itself in seconds. When it cooled, the result was a matrix filled with those same bright lime clasts, brittle, yes, but reactive. They were, in essence, tiny capsules of potential energy waiting for centuries to awaken. Those clasts would later prove to be the key to Roman concrete's immortality. When cracks formed and water seeped in, the lime dissolved, recrystallized, and sealed the damage self-healing, centuries before the term existed. What the world had dismissed as imperfection was actually foresight. Even more astonishing was the Romans' attention to geography. They didn't just use any volcanic ash. They carefully sourced it from Pozzuoli, near Naples, a region whose unique mineral composition was perfect for bonding with lime. Sometimes they transported this ash hundreds of kilometers by sea. That level of dedication speaks to something deeper than mere construction. It was craftsmanship guided by observation, by reverence for materials, by time itself. When I imagined Roman builders standing near Vesuvius at dawn, their furnaces glowing against the black ash hills, I realized they weren't primitive at all. They were chemists in togas, scientists guided by intuition, craftsmen who knew that the heart of endurance lay in controlled imperfection. In our labs, we chase precision, uniformity, elimination of error. The Romans embraced variability. They built a material that could change, react, and heal. Where we sought to dominate nature, they collaborated with it. And perhaps that's why their creations endure while ours decay. That day, as the hot mixture cooled on the lab bench, steam still curling off its surface, I felt an emotion I hadn't expected: humility. Because standing amid our sensors and scanners, I realized we weren't teaching the ancients anything new. We were merely learning to listen to them again. When I returned home after those months of research, I began to see my city differently. Every bridge, every parking garage, every tower now looked like a countdown clock ticking quietly toward its own decay. I used to admire their lines, their power, their gleaming newness. But now I saw them for what they were: temporary monuments to our impatience. Modern concrete is born fast and dies young. We pour it, cure it in less than a month, and rush on to the next project. 28 days, that's all we give it to harden before it must bear the weight of our world. The Romans, by contrast, built with time as an ingredient. Their concrete cured slowly, often for months, strengthening layer by layer, settling into itself like stone aging into wisdom. I walked beneath a highway one afternoon, listening to the echo of cars above me. The pillars were covered in stains, streaks of rust bleeding downward like tears. It struck me how much effort we spend resisting time rather than working with it. Every year, cities allocate billions to patch, repaint, and reinforce the same structures, fighting a battle they will lose again in a few decades. In the United States alone, we spend more than $125 billion each year maintaining crumbling concrete. Engineers call it infrastructure renewal. I call it a confession proof that we built badly and refuse to admit it. The American Society of Civil Engineers estimates that $4.5 trillion will be needed over the next decade just to bring our existing structures back to acceptable. But no one talks about the deeper cost, the environmental one. Cement production accounts for 8% of global CO2 emissions. That means if the cement industry were a nation, it would trail only China and the United States in its pollution. And because our structures live short lives, we repeat the same wasteful cycle again and again. Build, decay, rebuild. Every repetition consumes more limestone, more energy, more air. The Romans built once and their work still stands. We build 40 times over to achieve the same lifespan. 40 times the energy, 40 times the emissions, 40 times the arrogance. I thought about this while reviewing inspection reports late at night, fluorescent light flickering over stacks of paperwork. Each line of data represented another wound. Spalling observed, section loss, corrosion depth 3 millimeters. Every bridge and building has a pulse, and I could feel them all weakening. Sometimes, I imagined our civilization not as a skyline, but as a patient, one whose bones were slowly rusting away. The truth is, our problem isn't technical, it's philosophical. The Romans built for eternity because they believed their world deserved to last. They built for gods, for legacies, for grandchildren they'd never meet. We build for investors, for deadlines, for the next fiscal quarter. They mixed patience into their mortar. We mix profit margins. That realization hurt more than any crack I'd ever mapped on paper, because it meant our decay wasn't inevitable, it was a choice. We traded permanence for convenience. We told ourselves that rebuilding is progress, when in fact it's just repetition disguised as innovation. And so, I found myself staring again at the photograph of the Pantheon on my desk. Its oculus open to the sky, rain and light falling freely through it, yet never destroying it. The Romans didn't fear exposure. They designed for it. Perhaps the greatest engineering secret we've lost isn't a recipe, but a philosophy. Build as if time were your collaborator, not your enemy. There's a moment in every engineer's life when the weight of what we've lost becomes unbearable, and then, strangely, it turns into hope. Because once you see that the ancients weren't just lucky, that their endurance was deliberate, you start to realize it's not too late to learn from them. In recent years, scientists have begun to do exactly that. At MIT, Admir Masick and his team didn't just study Roman concrete, they rebuilt it. They've now founded a company to bring that same self-healing principle into modern use. Their goal isn't nostalgia, it's survival. Imagine bridges, tunnels, and seawalls designed not to resist cracks but to repair them, structures with built-in endurance, where a small fracture triggers chemistry instead of catastrophe. And it isn't only the Romans whispering across the centuries. Researchers today are creating concrete that contains living organisms. They mix dormant bacterial spores, resilient species of bacillus into the wet cement. When cracks form and water seeps in, those bacteria awaken. Feeding on calcium lactate, they excrete limestone as a byproduct, sealing the fissure from within. It's concrete that breathes, heals, and evolves, an echo of the same Roman idea, reborn through biology. Others are experimenting with capsules filled with healing agents that burst open only when stress fractures appear, releasing minerals that crystallize inside the wound. Some teams are even embedding carbon fibers that act like nerves, detecting changes in electrical resistance to reveal where the material is weakening, a concrete with a nervous system capable of feeling its own pain. At first glance, these technologies sound futuristic. But to me, they feel ancient because they all return to the same idea the Romans already knew: resilience through regeneration. Of course, there are obstacles. Bacterial concrete costs 3 to 5 times more than the ordinary kind. The volcanic ash from Pozzuoli is rare, and industry habits die hard. Most companies build for deadlines, not for centuries. Yet when you calculate the true cost, the endless repairs, the CO2 we pour into the sky, the roads rebuilt before our children even grow up, it's clear that the cheap way is the expensive way. When I imagine the future now, I no longer see glass towers and asphalt ribbons crumbling into dust. I see cities that grow wiser with age, bridges whose cracks heal overnight with the rain, seawalls that laugh at the waves, cathedrals and homes that still stand when our names are forgotten because they were built with respect, not speed. Sometimes I close my eyes and think of the Pantheon. I imagine 1,000 years from now, someone standing where I once stood, sunlight falling through the oculus, the air cool and still. Perhaps they will wonder, as I did, how something built by hands so ancient could still feel alive. And maybe, if we listen to the old masters long enough, our own creations might one day earn that same silence, the silence of a structure that no longer fights time, but belongs to it.